Pleasure to have you on the podcast today. I'm really excited about our conversation. Been looking forward to a while because obviously we're going to talk about two important letters that seem to be dominating the use these days. And I guess I mentioned before recording, you're building, I think, one of the leading Canadian AI companies. You definitely sit from a privileged position to talk to us about what's going on. And like I said, selfishly, I want to learn from you. I want to talk, before we talk about your company, I'd love to learn a little bit about your background. You started academia, like curious to understand your research interest. What piqued your interest when you started like working in academia?
Yeah, back from my background, while I was still in Russia and Moscow doing an undergrad degree in computer science, I was always excited about academic position. And then when time comes and I get an offer to come for my master's at the University of Toronto, that's back in 2006, I was very excited about it. And then as I progressed and published my first papers, I was always very excited to actually contribute the knowledge to the state of the art. It was very exciting to me. I'm coming from the ground where my parents did this as well. As I progressed through the ranks, I've seen a lot of good opportunities between both academia, research, and in terms of company creation. And this is something led eventually to my company. In terms of direct academic path, so I got my master's at the University of Toronto. After that, I worked several years in Canada on compiler optimization at IBM Research Lab. And after that, I got my PhD at Carnegie Mellon University in Computer Science Department, working on the intersection of computer architecture and systems. And while being at U of T, though, I already was exposed to AI and machine learning with Jeff Hinton teaching these classes at U of T. And I always remember to use them in my research. And then at some point, I started to realize, you know what, it seems to be getting very mature and interesting. So maybe I should spend more time on that area. And right after I graduated from my PhD, that was one of the topic of my focus. So since 2016, I'm very actively working on AI optimization. That's the topic of interest.
What was the title of your PhD thesis?
It was efficient data compression for memory hierarchies. So I was essentially looking how to reduce the consumptions of the bits you store in your caches, the number of bits you send, and essentially it's all about efficiency. I like to make things run fast and efficient. And that is reflective on what me and my company is doing in AI space as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's almost like the embryo of what the company is, right? Like if I understood correctly, what you guys are building is very much in line with efficiency around LLMs. I want to make you spoke about this insight of I don't know if it's the right metaphor, but like going from applied research to engineering, right? So like when did you realize that this is now has a practical value beyond just research in the academic world and is a real engineering problem that you could solve at scale? I don't know if it's even the right framing, but curious to hear you when you spoke about that like insight of, hey, this is like beyond the walls of the university.
Usually, the way you look at the problems is that you look at something that industry either like already have as a problem but not yet know how to solve. And that's how we usually get great papers published. But not every great paper has to become a product. So several things needs to come up and align so that you want to do this. Like here, I work on something that I thought is interesting, important, but I also see the trending need for what I'm doing. And at the beginning, that was mostly distributed training. That's what was consuming a lot of cycles. People don't have enough compute. What usually happens afterwards, at some point, you realize that the research you're doing requires so much manpower to be consumable, then the only way to do it is actually to go and build a company around it. So how you realize it? So it's not like I woke up one day and said, oh, I want to build a company like that. We are building with my students several different artifacts that help to accelerate those models at scale. And then I gave talks at Facebook, at Google, and Amazon. And I'm saying, guys, I have this problem, and we build some solutions. Let's work together on it. And they're like, you know what? That's right. That's a good solution, but your software is not enterprise ready. There's no way we can use it. So you either have to come join us and build it here or go and build it, yourself. And then after a few iterations and knowing how is it to build something like that in a large company, I said probably the only way for me to make an impact is actually to build it. But in order to build it, as from a business side, it has to have enough commercial traction. So when I realized that's a promising direction, I still want to feel that the market is almost there. So it isn't like my thesis where I work on optimizing something called prefetching in memory hierarchies. It's the same problem like prefetches, and so is creation of the company needs to be timely. So too early is very bad, is as bad as late, right? When you come to the game. So you really want to create a company when the problems is kind of start to be evident, but there's not yet too many players there. So you're just early enough. So when you try to scale your team and build the product, the market exactly needs something like that. It's a very hard problem, the same as prefetches in the memory hierarchy. How would you know what would be accessed next? So that's the problem you're trying to solve, which is not very non-trivial.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Yeah, and like you mentioned that timing thing, and I think it's very true in the world of investment, right? Like you could think of pets.com, like 2004, but took 10 years for the internet to mature for, let's say, a Chewy to come at scale. And my understanding is that you left University of Toronto right around the time of the big, let's say, LLM ChatGPT moment. Was that something that gave you a bit of more conviction that, hey, now is the time, to your point of timing, to start a company in this space?
So essentially, the specific timing of the company, there are like some maturity level that we reach, and also some personal setback. Like I was feeling that we are ready to start the company around 2020. So I think they had enough interest in tech and all of that. But then it's unfortunately co-aligned with COVID started. And my knowledge about fundraising and VCs was like, if you want to fundraise, you have to go fly all the way to the Bay Area. Who's going to give you millions of dollars to build a company if you sit locked down in Toronto and the Bay Area is also locked down? So there's no way to cross the border, literally. And then I talked to one of our former students whom I collaborate before, Aidan Gomez, who just created Cohera a few years ago. And I told him, Aidan, like I see like Cohera is growing and like everything is like, what's going on? That was around 2021, like mid 2021. And that where things starts to open up and like he said, oh Gennady, everything is over Zoom these days. You can raise millions of dollars without leaving your, your apartment. It's been a long time when I felt so dumb in my life. And oh my God, yes, apparently that's the thing. And then what I started doing, I had always built a team of my students that they're not just great at publishing papers, they're actually good at building stuff like artifacts, real things. And I just talked a few of them and said, guys, probably it's the right time. Let's start to discuss what we want to build, right? So it was not a random and unprepared move. And then we like book a special time. It was easy during COVID. Nobody was anyway go to the university. So we just periodically have meetings and talk about what the company could look like. And then by early 2022, I felt like we were ready. I have a few co-founders and a few founding engineers. And by March, I incorporated the company in 2022, and then we started the fundraise process. And the beauty of being and the strength being a professor, like day one, I have 9 people in my team. So don't start with 2, 3 people. I had like immediately 9 people because there was like my former students, masters or PhD, they all know what we're doing. The minute you tell them, okay, that's what we're building, they know the strength of the team, the excitement is there. Several of them drop their current jobs and join us immediately.
That's a great story. Yeah, so we often talk about the disadvantages of like from leaving academia to build a startup. I think that's maybe a less well-known advantage. Okay, like you surround yourself literally with PhD level geniuses that want to join a startup. Maybe walk us through, Gennady, a little bit then what is CentML? Like we spoke a little bit about that founding insight of efficiency, but yeah, give us maybe a bit more color.
Yeah, so as you probably have seen before, like I had a lot of background on how to make computer architectures very efficient, right? And the motivation here was that general purpose architectures are very well optimized. Intel did it for a long time. There's not much left. And then out of a sudden, there is a so big specialized workload that requires so much compute that we've never seen before. That's a clear there is a need to build something special for those cases. And that's what we're doing. Like we're doing benchmarks for ML, then we start to do profiling tools, and then we start to optimize these things. And then the whole motivation was always is that if the demand for that compute is so huge, you better be using it. So like one of the moment that I first realized how bad things are in this space was 2016. I just finished my PhD at CMU. I got an offer from University of Toronto and I delayed by 1 year to spend 1 year in industry. And at Microsoft, I've seen, oh my God, everyone is like paranoid about AI and running their training jobs. And there's a lineup of people. Everyone was trying to know someone who can get them early access to that thing. And I came there, I was like, guys, you're all excited about it. How's it running? Is it running well? It's like, why are you asking this question? Isn't that a dumb question? Like, it's running. It means it's busy. It's like how you can ask that how efficiently it's running. And then I realized that ML people view hardware, my area, very differently than I do. They think if something is running, it's like 100% capacity. It's like cars running, right? But reality is the minute I got access to that cluster and were allowed to do measurements on utilization, I got utilization on the order of 10, 15%. Literally, everyone is waiting in line, bribing their friends to get the early access to get their paper out to the next NeurIPS, but they're just utilizing like 15% of all the capacity there. So those cycles are completely wasted. So then you realize it's like these guys don't understand how it works actually. So they understand the math behind it, but they don't understand the system that run it. And then you realize the people that build the system, they actually disconnected from the AI field. They build it completely not thinking about those implications. So you say, oh my God, this whole thing has to be redesigned. And this is how you come with the understanding that if this thing, and it was keep growing for almost 10 years at 10x a year in terms of model sizes, in terms of the demand for compute, that it's an exponential law we've never seen before. It's like Moore's law was like growing 2x every 1.5 years. Here we're growing 10x every year. So it's unsustainable. You need to work on efficiency. You need to invent a lot of things that those models actually usable for practical things. And this is why a lot of the things behind creating a company and doing research for it was around efficiency, how to make those things run and not wasting your money and not wasting your compute.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. It's such fascinating. It's, yeah, talking about like timing again, and just it comes back to how lucky and how good you have to be with the combination of both to just be at that moment and realize we could probably map NVIDIA stock price to what you're doing and find it fascinating, right? Because it's not like the world is going to need less compute moving forward, right?
That's the
I,
two
I,
things you do. You do research in that space, and then you see the trajectory. Say, oh, it's a time to buy Nvidia stock. Like literally, that's what I did.
Yeah, yeah, very good move then. Well, I'm going to go back to talk about compute a little bit and maybe your thoughts on the broader space and maybe some of the other frontier models, but maybe to double click on your solution, right? So you start a startup, I think you raised the early round by Radical. So now you're trying to build in the space. Can you walk us through then the actual solution and then also the customers, right? The enterprise customers, like how they deploy your solution.
Yeah, so it's a bit of history. So we raised the pre-seed round with Radical that was like 3.5 million. That was July 2022. And then we raised the biggest seed round, 27 million in September. That was with Gradient, NVIDIA, and obviously Radical and a few others like Thomson Reuters and Deloitte Ventures. So that capital allows me to build the team, right, and grow it further and deliver the product that actually would be competitive in the space. And the idea behind the product is that I always thought that the people who actually build this model, the AI specialists, which is I'm not really an AI specialist, I'm a system architect, right? Systems hardware person. I want to make their life easier so they don't need to think what has to happen to utilize the resources they pay for. I realized that their background comes very different. They would never want to learn all these details on the hardware and the system software. So someone have to do this for them, right? Because they've seen the level of skill set they have. They would be good with Python. They can run PyTorch, but they're not going to do low-level coding in C, C++ with Scooter. That's not their skill set. So I try to make sure that whatever they want to run, whatever silicon they want to select, they get the best possible performance. I try to also build something that's not going to log them to any particular vendor. So the thing we offer on our CentML platform is the ability to run inference or fine tuning of your favorite model without being limited to any particular cloud vendor or hardware vendor. So we support NVIDIA GPUs, AMD GPUs, Google TPUs, Amazon Inference out of the box with no extra effort needed on your end. We support all the major cloud providers, right, and adding more and more. So we build the technology that allows you to just bring your model, say, I want to build a chatbot. I want to build a rack. I want to fine tune my Llama model with that data on top of it. And everything becomes just a few clicks. It actually being easy for you, and hardware becomes just a commodity resource for you. Performance per dollar metrics, you know how much it would cost you to do it, and you go and pick what's the best for you.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if this is the right comparison, but it feels a little bit like, what Google did with Kubernetes, right? Allow you to run multiple clouds. And You spoke about vendor lock-in. One thing that CIOs hate is being stuck to one particular vendor. So I imagine you're at the forefront of seeing how these companies are experimenting with LLMs, trying to implement into their enterprise. You spoke about Aiden and Core here, and they're obviously at a different level in the stack. What's been the customer reception so far of your product, right? What do you see in terms of concrete ROI for them?
Yeah, great question. I had a few customers. Some of them are big. I can't speak about the names, but I can hint it at some of them. So essentially, the major version of the product that I'm talking right now was released last November, and we start to see a lot of early signal of attraction, then converted into some really good deals this year. What the customer looking at is that the people that got serious about AI, they realize they need to run it at scale. If you had millions and millions of customers, tens and hundreds of millions of products, then if you want to run something at that scale, everything you do, even an inference job, is just multiplied by these huge numbers. It means you can't just go for the next shiny, fancy model like Llama 4 or DeepSeek R1 that is still huge. You need to run it at the scale where the ROI makes sense. And your consumptions of compute and the models you use needs to make sense. So a lot of these customers realize that the way to do it is to go for smaller models, and you take those models and fine tune them using the larger models, right? And then generate smaller models, right? Distilled and fine tuned for the purposes of what they run. And then they want to be able to run a huge amount of traffic through these models 24/7. And you need to be able to deliver that capabilities for them. So enterprise customers like that had this demand. They said, I need to run this many like models at that scales on hundreds or even thousands of GPUs 24/7, and I need to get that throughput, or otherwise it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, interesting. So I imagine today, and maybe it's a presumption of you're really dealing just with enterprise that are experimenting a little bit with LLMs. Can you speak to, and obviously feel free to share as much as you want, but can you speak to how much of it is experimentation versus, let's say, customer facing applications? Like I'm a huge bank or an airline, et cetera, like big enterprise side. Like I feel part of it is still in the figuring out what this new tool that does fire can do.
There is a lot of experimentation going on, but the use case I was talking to you is the existing customer where we already run for them in production. This is not experimentation. This is the use case where the customer, one of the biggest Canadian companies, actually run it at a huge scale, like on literally on their production workloads. So this is not a toy anymore. That's not experimentation. A lot of the early years of AI were like that. That's why it was difficult to generate revenue because a lot of people just experiment. But right now we see real customers that actually do this at scale. Obviously, they gradually get to that stage, and maturity of different customers is different. But we have enterprises like that. We have leading AI startups, right? Some of them would just build AI apps. Some of them actually still building foundational models, including the one that not necessarily transformer-based models, like new models. And again, there's the whole a lot of compute that goes into building the new foundational models. Then the model you build, because that's not a standard model, someone has to optimize it. So it has to be written optimally. So that's an important one. Then another category important for me is the neo clouds. You can think about there were three major cloud vendors: AWS, GCP, and Azure that control most of the market, and that was pre-AI world. But then when ChatGPT happened, a lot of people start to build AI dedicated clouds because of how much compute you need. So companies like CoreWeave, Nebius, Cruiser, Lambda appeared and becomes quite successful. And if you look at their recent benchmark, they're quite good. So they're naturally all our partners because they need to run sophisticated stack that the major one might have because of the size of their team, but these guys need to get it somewhere. And they're good at building cloud, but they're not big enough to build everything else themselves. So we have become a natural partner for them.
No, that's really interesting. Yeah, you mentioned CoreWeave, I think, was like the poster child of those neo clouds. I'd be curious to hear, Gennady, on how you think about competitive advantage. And I know it's like a classic, like businessy concept. The one thing that makes me pop up is I mentioned on your website, you guys obviously have all the open source models that people can use. On DeepSeek recently, I think made waves, even though it's only been like 2 months or 3 months. It's not been that long, but it's really become top of mind where they're able to obviously create almost like cutting edge frontier model, or at least close to a lot of the benchmarks. but using a lot more compute. So like, how do you see that world of frontier models in relation to your business model, right?
Yeah, so first of all, the fact that open source models are successful is extremely important for us. That was actually one of the dangers when we create the company. It was actually pre-ChatGPT time, right? Obviously, OpenAI attract a lot of attention, and because of their model being so competitive at the beginning, a lot of people felt that's the only way to get the top intelligence in their model is to go with them on Anthropic, someone like that, right? Right now, the open source models pretty much caught up with the most advanced closed source model. I think people always mention DeepSeek R1. I actually think the most impressive one for me was the latest DeepSeek V3 from March 24th. That was amazing. That's the first time I've seen that the open source model pretty much match the most advanced model from OpenAI, like non-reasoning one. But nevertheless, it's like the OpenAI research model, like preview was like on par or worse than that model. That's very impressive. Why is it important for us? Because if the model actually comes and served by OpenAI and Anthropic, there's nothing we can do about it. They had their own internal stack. They're going to charge and optimize those things themselves. Where we are useful is where the person wants to do something with an open source model and want they retain the IP they generates with it and not being dependent on the third party vendor, don't want to send their data there. So our competitive mode is the ability to take any open source model, or even not open source, but the model the vendor is willing to share with us, even if it's proprietary. And then we do the full system level optimizations from the level of PyTorch, where the model is defined, all across the whole system stack to like building a specialized optimization like speculative decoding, continuous batching, to the platform level where we run different kernels from different models well together, to actual kernel generation. So we are able to generate kernels independently from even cloud hardware vendors like NVIDIA or AMD. We had our own compiler that allows you to generate automatically very competitive implementation of these kernels. So that flexibility to build things across the full stack and also being able to innovate because of our academic pedigree allows us to keep being competitive in this very hot field. And then the customer want ability, as we discussed before, flexibility with the hardware vendor selection, flexibility with cloud vendors. So like we build that technology thinking about it from the beginning. So now we get the benefit of that being available and competitive on the market.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And yeah, it totally makes sense, right? Like as the AI wave grows, and like you said, open source, I think is a godsend. Because can you imagine if you only had two, three God level models and everyone has to line up? Like that'd be very bad for society. So yeah, I think open source plays such a key role. How have your conversations been with the frontier models? Do you see them as potential channel partners where they can help open up doors for you and like help close deals?
Yeah, so we mostly partner with the guys like Matter or like some emerging companies like Liquid AI. So the people that build the models, right, and share them with the world gradually. We don't have any partnerships with some like OpenAI and Anthropic because, as I said, they had all their own stack in-house, which makes sense from their perspective, right? But all the people that build like Mistrals, DeepSeek, QN, Falcon, like all the models are supported like that. So we had all these models supported. You can run them as a serverless deployment where a model is fixed and you just go and send a request with the standard API. Or you can go and say, I want a dedicated deployment of my own. You come and generate it. And again, you don't need to code anything anymore. Like you just go and say, I want this model from Hugging Face and give me this. And give me the best deal on performance for that. And you go and get the best hardware. We optimize it for you. And then you run it and just interact with it.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's fascinating. It's fascinating, right? It's like such a like evolving space, right? It's like the fountain of youth, right? Like, the more you spend time learning about this, the more you don't know, I feel. What's your view on maybe specifically the SentML, and then maybe I'll ask you a little bit more broad existential questions, like how early are we, let's say, in your journey, in the sense of like your current, let's say you have X number of customers, and you're like, this is something that X plus one we should be using. How early do we feel you feel we are in the deployment of this technology at the enterprise level specifically?
So I think it's still relatively early, but it's the stage where pretty much majority of them had some pilot project that started to conclude. So some of them concluded even last year, and that's the first customers to me and my competitors of similar solution that exist on the market. And now it's start to scale. So like all of us now probably feel that we're in a situation where it starts to converge to a real traction. And why enterprises are specifically interesting for me, no offense to startups, but a lot of them are burning VC's money. So they can make wild bets, burn the money, and nothing comes out of it. But enterprises don't work like that. They're only going to use the technology that's a real ROI for them. And that's what you start to see right now. So the customers who come to right now, it's the people that actually see the value of this thing implemented for a real use cases they have internally. So for them, as soon as you figure out all the concerns about security, speed, cost, if it all makes sense, it's now running in production. And I'm saying like we had examples of that. For me, it's still the number of customers is still less than 10. And the hope is probably by the end of the year being somewhere between, say, 12, 15, 20 customers, like significant customers. That I would consider as a success for the company because it already shows that we are post product market fit. We were able to sell it to a very demanding customer. Like a closing enterprise deal is not a joke. It takes months of convincing, negotiating, and all of that. And the fact that you can do this repetitively shows that you can scale it. So after that, it becomes not just technology, it becomes more about how well you can scale your team and your product and go to the next level. And that's why you need more resources and more funding. But that's what the next stage is. I think several of the companies in our space are already clearly post product market fit, but they're still very early. Like no one has like crazy IRR yet, from what I know from the public information. But people going towards that. Like the neo clouds probably starting to get maybe $1 billion IRRs right just now, but very little margins. And that kind of tell, but the potential of this market is enormous. And it's not my just biased opinion. It's like all the assessment that it's just only going to keep growing.
Yeah, yeah. What's that expression? It's like the AI will be the last technology breakthrough we ever need in a certain sense. Have you thought about going maybe more downstream, like in a sense of as the barriers of entry decrease, the models get cheaper, compute becomes more accessible? Do you see like right now, I imagine you're at the enterprise level, do you see mid-market being able to knock on your door as well, like expanding your addressable market?
Yeah, definitely. And even right now, we don't say no to that. It's just I always need to think about my limited engineering capacity and ability to process customers. So right now, we take either AI native startups or enterprises and cloud vendors. But as enterprises will adopt it, or the standard businesses like average size, mid size businesses will also start to do this as well, right? That's going to happen. But again, at that scale, you need a few quick big wins to justify the product market fit, right? So you want six, ideally 7-digit deals, and that's you need to deal with enterprises. And a few deals like that, that's a good indication of initial traction and evidence. And then as you scale, you're definitely going to go in different verticals. Right now, when VCs ask me that question, like, oh, which vertical you specialize in? I said, guys, look, our product is useful across all the verticals. Like the market is not at the stage where you can say, oh, this only works for insurance companies or banks, right? It's everywhere. It's disruptive. So you just find the ones that in their journey and the right time, so we're useful for them.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, and sometimes I'm one of those dumb VCs, like, hey, what's your vertical, etc. But in your particular case, it feels like the opportunity is broader than one sector. It seems that going back to how early we are, maybe on that front, I know you maybe it's more of a dinner table question with friends, but it's like, what are your thoughts in terms of the current AI landscape, right? So like you have, I guess, about we're years away from building God level intelligence to, oh no, it's decades away, and probably the truth is somewhere in the middle. But where do you think, maybe specifically to the size of the opportunity, right? So it's like the models are improving, you said, at an exponential rate. What's most interesting about that topic? Is there anything that interests you personally in terms of when you think about where this is going?
Yeah, there's a lot of what you ask here. I don't want to jump on AGI discussion and make a prediction whether it's 2 years from now and 20 years from now. There's enough of that said online. So instead of I can say that what I see that technology already reached the stage where it's going to be disruptive to many different industries, even in its current state. Whether that's a final outcome, it would be depressing to think that we cannot invent anything better than transformers. So I'm pretty sure the new things will come gradually at time. And even LLMs in general are just the first step. I think they themselves will just become a building block. The next and what that building block of. So right now people are working on agentic system or I like the term compound system more. So where you combine different intelligent agents between each other and you exclude the human from the loop, that's very inefficient. That's the next promising direction. I think everyone talks about it. People get funding, build startups. I don't see yet a significant enterprise traction. Like enterprises still try to consume the things were invented before, like fine tuning, rack, like they get enough to consume, right? And to get justification. But that's coming, right? So that technology is being built. It's interesting, it's fascinating, sometimes scary a bit. Like I think when I was an undergrad, we were talking about Turing test and when it one day will be possible. I'm just reading an article this year. ChatGPT and Llama convincingly passed Turing test recently, like by a significant margin. And that the funniest thing in that article I read was that it's not because it was smarter that they were able to pass it, is because it was more human-like. It was more involved in the conversations. Like people felt that actually that's it's very attributes of a human. So AI was actually better and human-related characteristics and ideals than the humans themselves that seek to fool the people. So it was very impressive. So yes, it's getting actually quite impressive over time.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I think we've passed the Turing test, and like people don't care. It's this is just like
Nobody
natural. Like
noticed. That was so mind blowing. Like 20 years ago when I was an undergrad, that was like, oh my God, when it happens, everything will change. Now it's happened, nobody noticed,
that's
right?
it. We just go on with our lives. Maybe a bit of a left field question, but it's let's say okay, let's say there's something happens and CentML is outlawed, like the government takes away your company, and you're forced to go back to academia. What would you be studying today? And a kind of leading question of you mentioned transformers. The one topic I think about in terms of academia is like, hey, how these things are going to help make the future breakthroughs. So I'd be curious to hear you if you had to go back to academia, would you just continue studying this topic? Would you think of new areas of interest?
I would say still there's a lot of interesting things, but I wouldn't feel like jumping on completely random things like quantum. I would actually probably work on compound system. I think it's a very exciting topic. It's like essentially everything we build in software now has to be somewhat redesigned. It was assumed to interact in a certain way with humans. But now, in reality, most of that software doesn't need to interact with humans. It's going to interact with other software. So, what is the right interfaces? How it's going to talk? How are you going to even build things of components that are so unpredictable and stochastic? Like when I normally build software, I expect certain determinism from it. You don't expect it to be statistically like correct, but like doing random things around. We never build anything. How are you going to even debug this thing? Like key principle is in software engineering is that, oh, I can, if the problem happens, I take the input from a customer, run it, reproduce it, look at the problem. Here it might be never reproducible anymore. It might happen just once and you don't know whom to blame. Which of these agents generates something random that it caused this problem? How to deal in this world? We're like completely not ready. So from an academic perspective, is the whole open field. There are more problems than smart people in the world to solve them. So there's like plenty of things to solve for the rest of my life. If something like that happens, fingers crossed it won't.
Yeah, that's very good answer, Gennady. Very good answer. Maybe a personal question about your path from academia to now running, like a very, I want to say, consequential Canadian company. You've gained new skills. You've learned about clearly learned about fundraising and building a team. But I'd be curious to hear you about maybe some meta principles around, I don't know, resilience or learning, or what things that you've had to overcome to get to the CEO that you are today.
That's a whole topic on its own and what you have to go. You can write a book by now probably about that. But the short answer is like in academia, the world you live in a little bit idealistic world. So yeah, the things in academia are not perfect. There is like reviews can be unfair and things like that. But you still live in much more fair world than the real world is. In the real world where the big money is involved, people do all the tricks, people like to cheat on you, like everything's possible here. And you have to get used to it. And the people act very differently than in that more idealistic environment. You also have to deal with a lot of pressure from your investors, from your customers. You like literally 24/7 on it, and you need to find the way to survive through that and be competitive. The time moves differently. I thought that tenure and like getting PhD is stressful. That's nothing compared to building a startup from scratch, right? A lot of things you have from academia is transferable and those skills are useful. And I believe even venture capitalists, at least some of them, value the skills we have. There is like perception that academics are not reliable and like anything goes south, they would just go back to academia and drop their companies. But if you actually carefully look at the founders, you can find the right ones. And academics, though, bring that rigor and novelty. They don't just build products around some random little things that can be disrupted immediately. They're actually usually more innovative and built over some more serious foundation, right? Those things. So it's harder to copy it, right? For the big companies, even. Another thing you learn is that even if you build a successful tech and successful product, if you don't build a successful sales or marketing team, it doesn't matter. Nobody knows about your stuff. So how is it to hire your VP of sales or VP of marketing? That I never need to think about it in my life. So people think engineering hiring is hard, and it is, and the talent is rare. But I was doing this all my life. I know these people. Now I need to learn a completely different category of people. And some of them are extremely good at telling you the story you want to hear, but not exactly what they're doing. And you need to read through all of that. So you need to constantly self-educate yourself, learning about these things. I don't think I ever stopped learning new things when I become a CEO. The whole 3 years, I'm keep reading and learning, and like it's an endless process. It's self-rewarding, but it's also stressful. I had to be honest. Especially fundraising process is very stressful.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Yeah, going through that a little bit on my end right now. It's yes, it is a bit stressful. And wait, is there anything you would maybe to if you had to like fast track, you go back to let's say the inception of CentML, and you're like, hey, you go back and you're talking to your firm yourself. What advice would you give that person today?
If I would have a chance to give advice to myself, right? Like I would probably build some of this relationship early, right? I had a lot of connections in academia, but I had almost zero connections in the enterprise world or into VC world. So I had to build all of that from scratch. And it's a trial and error. Like you don't know who's good, how to read it, what they're looking for. So there's a lot of education. Right now, with that knowledge, if I ever have to do it again and do a second startup, that helps a lot immensely because I know the right people, I know the people that are good, I know where to go, I know how to behave with them. It would save me a lot of energy, resources, and avoiding mistakes. The same thing in being how to build the team. Again, I had a good understanding how to build technology. I had a reasonable understanding how to build a product. I never had an idea how to build a good sales pipeline. That's a completely new thing. So like how to make your marketable, but not like dumb marketable that just promise things and don't deliver. Like your marketing needs, again, remember the example of prefetching needs to get just enough ahead of you. It should promise what you can deliver soon. It shouldn't overpromise, right? But it shouldn't be like too flat and not aggressive enough because then you look more shallow than others. All the skills you learn by trying and hiring people and firing it because you do making mistakes. I would love to avoid some of those mistakes by having that background, but there's no replacement for the life experience.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's only one way to learn, so it's by doing.
Just trying it.
Maybe
Yeah.
maybe that's why the LLMs are so good, is they're just learning in the repository of all our mistakes of
Yeah.
humanity's all made.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, do you have a, I know this is the classic kind of VC question, but like not more on a personal level, not about an IPO, not about necessarily about an exit or selling, but like, what is your ambition for CentML? What would you like to achieve in terms of impact?
Yeah, and that's you mentioned the right word, impact. So I was looking like remember when I said I didn't start by building a company. I first come to big guys and said, "Let's build it together. I'm happy to work with you." So I don't. I had an ambition that I want to have an impact in the world, and I always had this ambition. It was not about me just becoming rich and let's build a company for that. I would be happy to do it together with Google or like Matter, but it turns out they're not ready. You either need to be subsumed by them or you need to do it independently, and that's the only way, right? So I think the ambition for me right now is to, for the company in the next 2, 3 years, become to go to a place for everyone want to start to deploy, fine tune the model, and that people come and know, oh, that's an independent company that can actually tell what's the best chip to use for my model, optimize it for me, and deliver the best possible performance at a good cost. So I want people to know that place exists. It's performing highly and competitively, and it's already seen all the different independent benchmarks how we perform, even against that monsters like Google or Amazon in terms of performance in our models. We usually outperform them by a significant margin. So that's I want to be that place and knowing we're not independent. So I'm not NVIDIA, I'm not AMD, I'm not Google. I'm not have a bias that you use just that particular chip. I'm also not a particular cloud vendor, so I'm not going to redirect all of you to my cloud offering because that's good for me. I'm actually an independent player that wants people be able to get the best of all that, hardware world and get it in a transparent way. So that would be a success, that impact. And whether that means an exit, that it means partnering with someone big or a coalition of people or go into IPO, we'll see, right? Like all options are on the table. Right now, I just need to get more of that traction and proving us to the world and the usual growth phase.
Yeah, yeah, super inspiring, super inspiring. And I think it's probably a great way to cap our conversation. And I've learned so much from you today, so I really want to thank you for your time. And my traditional closing question is that if people want to learn more about what you're building, connect with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, the usual ways. You can use my email, which is my first name, Gennady at centml.ai. Obviously, go to the company website, centml.ai, and LinkedIn, right, where I'm very active responding to messages and like, connecting to people.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you. Pleasure talking to you. Thanks for great questions. Have a nice day.